As probably most of all us already know, having joined this session, conflicts pose challenges to water management, and Middle East is the hotspot of such influence. And in academic environments, we have seen that there has been some progress taking up this issue, but many practitioners from local, national, and international have been tackling this to provide clean water and enable local water management during conflict. So with this session, we want to present and connect insights from research and praxis on management of water in conflict-effective settings of the Middle East. Our session is contributing to the conference team building the evidence base, which is focusing on connecting research and praxis to identify environmental peace-building lessons learned in different contexts. We have researchers and practitioners in our panel. They are involved in water management and delivery of water services in conflict countries of the Middle East. They will share experiences and lessons learned from their own work and then engage in a discussion on how to connect insights from research and praxis and how to improve their collaboration. We will start with their short presentations by 4 panelists. After each presentation, there will be opportunity for a short clarification question from the audience. And hopefully this will leave also ample time for the panelists to discuss together several questions we have, and then also contributions from the audience. Before we start, I would like to share a few housekeeping notes. First of all, we have a code of conduct for the whole conference. I will just share it with all of you to take a moment to have a look. And also for your information, you will see it in the chat as well. Please pay attention to this policy of our conference. So, about participation in the session, I think it's good to clarify that we already have quite many participants. Out of, I think, 66, at least 60 of them are our audience, the rest is the hosts. And our tech support, Buket and Joe, which will hopefully not need to work during this session. But in case you have any issues, they will be in charge. We have our 4 speakers. They are Julian, Guillaume, Alexandra, and Salman. We have only 90 minutes. So we need to be relatively brief. Our speakers have short presentations of 10 minutes. And then after that, we will have a panel with them answering questions about collaboration between research and practice. And we also want to have your inputs, of course. The chat will be open and visible to everyone. So please feel free to ask questions and add comments using the chat. And if you do want to speak, please raise your hand using the reactions button. And if we have too many questions, we will need to order them and maybe select a few depending on the topic. But we will try to engage many participants from the audience as well. So without further ado, I would like to start with the first speaker. That's Juliana Schillinger. Juliana has a bachelor degree in environmental sciences from University of Freiburg in Germany and master's in international land and water management from Wageningen University in the Netherlands. She's currently a PhD candidate at the University of Twente, also in the Netherlands. Her PhD project is funded by Heinrich Böll Stiftung. In her PhD research, she's looking at impacts of armed conflict in water management in the Middle East with cases from Palestine, Syria, Yemen, and Iraq. Julian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gül. And thank you to everybody for joining us for this session. I know for quite some of you, it's rather early, especially in Europe and Africa. It is for us as well, so we're suffering together. I'm very happy to kick off this session with indeed a couple of insights from my own PhD, as Gül already mentioned, on the impact of armed conflict on local water management, and just in general reflecting a little bit on doing academic research on armed conflict. But to start with, I'd like to have a little bit of a closer look first on some of what Gül said, which is the overall issue of water management and water access in armed conflict. This is by no means a new topic. We all know, I think, on some level that there are challenges to safe access to water in conflict settings. People have known about that for a while. There has been knowledge production about it for quite a while. But this has mainly been done by humanitarian organizations, by development organizations. For example, back in 1995, the ICRC convened a forum that took stock of everything we know about water and war, just to kind of collect lessons learned up to that point. Another sort of important point for me back in 2011 was when the World Bank published the numbers that you see on the screen right now, which showed very clearly that people in conflict-affected countries are disproportionately affected by a lack of access to safe drinking water. At the same time, however, scientific research has been a bit slow to catch up, as Gül mentioned in her introduction. This is a graph from a review paper we published 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago, where we basically looked at scientific publications on any kind of water in armed conflict settings. And you can see that from like 2007, 2008 onwards, there is quite an uptick. But up until then, there was barely any research interest. But now we're finally getting there. So the question is kind of, why are we doing this research? What do we want to reach? And generally, when we do scientific research, and I say we as researchers, I'm just kind of generalizing everybody thinking the same way as I do. What we're looking for is sort of what is happening, why is it happening, and ideally, how can we get to a point where we can predict and maybe with regards to conflict impacts, avoid what is happening in water management in these conflict-affected countries. To get there, we generally compare different cases, we generalize our findings from all kinds of different regions, and we develop conceptual frameworks to explain real-world phenomena. There's just one problem with that. In the same review paper, we looked at what kind of studies are being done on water in armed conflict. And you can see that this comparative analysis that would allow us to really generalize and build those frameworks are very rare. So barely anybody does them. The reason for that is generally, it's just pretty hard. Like you need a lot of data. You need to go to different places, especially in conflict settings. That is quite a challenge. How do I know that? Because I try to do it. So that's kind of where my PhD came in. Where for me, I wanted to see what happens when I try to integrate and connect knowledge from different sources, from different organizations, and compare what is being done in the different cases of armed conflict. And then hope to, with the insights from this research, add to what we understand and how we understand water management in armed conflict. So that includes questions such as, what are the different conflict impacts? How does water management change throughout a conflict? And what are the common coping strategies that people use while they're in a conflict? As I said, I wanted to compare cases. So here are some cases. Basically, I looked at the Middle East and picked a total of 13 cases across 4 countries, Syria, Iraq, Palestine, and Yemen. And for each of those cases, if I was lucky, I got to do field work, especially before COVID-19 hit. But in many cases, it was also just reviewing a lot of documents, a lot of reports, data sets by all kinds of, especially local and international organizations working on the ground. Now that left me with a whole lot of data. And then what? The idea is to use all of this empirical data and link it to what we already know about water management in general. So I looked at what's happening in a conflict, and I looked at how do we understand water management on a conceptual level, and how do they connect? Can we learn more from this connection? Throughout the PhD, there were 3 key sort of angles that I used: system thinking, infrastructure resilience, and water governance. I will just focus on the first one for this brief presentation, because I think it gets the point across pretty nicely of how research and practice can work together. When it comes to the system thinking, there were basically 2 questions that I wanted to tackle. One is, how do we define and trace different types of conflict impacts? And the other is then, how do water management systems react to conflict impacts? Now, I'm already saying systems. What does that mean? Basically, systems thinking is a way to make sense of complex processes such as water management by first considering the different elements and how they interact, and then basically drawing complicated figures to show it. Such a system has different components, as you can see here in yellow. In the case of the water management model that we used, these are, for example, the natural resources, the physical infrastructure that is there, but then also more social components like the institutions that exist, the resource users and things like that. And then there's interactions between the components that make everything happen. Now, the exact details you can basically ignore, but so you get the idea that we have different blocks of things and they interact with each other. And once we're in this mindset, we can then think of conflict impacts as kind of interactions as well, and define different kinds of impacts. So we have a direct impact and we have an indirect impact, which are terms you see quite often in this field, but there isn't really one consistent definition. So we made a new definition, so now there's an additional one that is inconsistent with the rest. But it helped us to have a clear idea of what is a direct impact, which is when a component is directly affected by the armed conflict, or if it's an indirect impact when there is some component in between or another system. And then we basically applied this definition and this system model to what we learned from the different cases. That is a very, very long paper that is hopefully published soon. For now, I will just show you an example for how conflict affects water resources within this framework. So here you go, one big figure to show complex circumstances. And you can see that there are all kinds of impacts that play a role and that we identified from the data that we got. On the one hand, there are direct impacts, such as access limitations that just limit your access, quite literally, to the water resource. For example, if it is located in an area of active fighting and you can't just go there. But then the vast majority of these impacts are indirect. So they come from damage to infrastructure that then leads, for example, to pollution of the water resources. They come from weakened institutions that mean that environmental regulations aren't enforced sufficiently, or they come from different systems, such as there just being a lack of energy. And all of these different impacts can have severe impacts on the water resources quality, on the access that people have to their local resources, which then has equally severe impacts, for example, on issues such as public health or just livelihoods. By mapping all of these processes in the way that we did via a systems thinking approach, we can really look at where does an impact come from? Like, what is this process from armed conflict to, in the end, for example, pollution of water resources, which can then be helpful to, for example, predict more accurately what will happen after a certain military strike or during a conflict. So for me, this is a very neat example of how by conceptualizing and comparing, we can really use the experiences of practitioners as we now took from all of these different reports, all the different data, and jointly create this kind of knowledge that can help us for future action in conflict affected areas, and just together build this knowledge base. So the very, very important point, and that is also why we're having this session in this, is indeed the collaboration between connecting the experiences from the field with academic research, with conceptualization and a bit more theoretical elements, to see how we can make sure that we get the most out of what is being done basically on both sides of this collaboration. And I really look forward to discussing that further in this session. I think we have a great panel to talk about it. And with that, I thank you for your attention this morning and hand over the floor to exactly those practitioners with the very valuable on-the-ground experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you. I look at the chat. There are no urgent burning questions at the moment, so I will indeed switch to our presentations from the speakers. So we will start with Guillaume Pierre-Ambert. He holds a master's degree in rural engineering and environment from the Swiss Institute of Technology in Lausanne. Since 2002, he has been working for the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, within the Water and Habitat Unit at the headquarters in Geneva, and had field assignments in Eritrea, Rwanda, Iraq, Pakistan, Palestine, and Nigeria. His last field assignment was in Jordan, Amman, where he held the position of Regional Water and Habitat Advisor for the Near and Middle East. He then came back to the headquarters, and he's now the head of the Water and Habitat Unit since 2021. Guillaume, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gül, for this introduction. I hope you can all see my screen. And so I'm first very happy to be here today with you to talk about the question of water management during conflict. My intervention will focus on how to ensure access to essential services during protracted armed conflict. So what is the operational challenge that we are seeking to address? There are three distinct characteristics of urban crisis. First, scale and impact. With some 50 million people worldwide currently affected by armed conflict in urban areas, ensuring access to essential civilian services over what is often prolonged periods of time poses unique challenges with devastating consequences for public health, displacement, and livelihoods, if improperly addressed. Additionally, of the 80 million people displaced worldwide, over 25 million of them are refugees, with a large number residing in host communities rather than camps. Second, complexity of urban services. As we will see in the next slide, urban services present some specificities that make them more vulnerable to certain types of hazards and crises. And third, duration of crisis. At ICRC, if we consider our 15 largest operations, we have been operating in those countries on average since 42 years. This demonstrates the protracted nature of conflicts which have no end in sight and require a different approach. As we will see, these characteristics translate into unique challenges when humanitarian organizations seek to develop an appropriate response. Unprecedented needs in urban crises, especially those that are protracted, necessitate a comprehensive rethink of collective humanitarian action. Then, what is the humanitarian comparative advantage in addressing protracted urban crises? First, cities are not designed with war in mind. With a high degree of interconnectedness between urban services, any single point of failure becomes a potential vulnerability in terms of service disruption. For example, in Aleppo, the whole water supply system relied on Al Hafsa water treatment plant and the pipeline bringing water to the city. During the conflict, when the water treatment plant was bombed, the whole population of Aleppo had no more access to water. And second, urban services are typically not resilient to the onset of hazards. This is not just war, but for instance, other hazards, like the recent winter storm in Texas showed that there is a lack of resilience in the electricity supply system. The very rapid period of urbanization and infrastructure expansion in the Middle East and North Africa over the past 2 decades failed to develop service providers resilient to the potential protracted crisis across the region. Humanitarian actors often have intimate insights into how systems break down during crisis because of their exposure to those events over the year in different contexts. This allows me to introduce the notion of cumulative impact, which really resonates with what Julian has been sharing before. In protracted conflict, we have observed a vicious cycle, combining both direct and indirect impacts, leading to service decline and significant risks to public health. One of the most striking examples is Yemen, where just a few years brought the whole population at risk of getting cholera. This whole approach is described in details in a report published in 2015 by the ICRC in collaboration with Mark Zaitoun, the professor of water security and policy at the University of East Anglia, and recently appointed director of the Geneva Water Hub. Now, what has to change in order to ensure adequate service provision in conflict settings? Following a workshop on water utilities management in protracted crisis that took place in May 2017 in Marseille, and that was attended by 30 professionals from the Middle East region water utilities and development and humanitarian agencies, the World Bank, UNICEF, and the ICRC launched a multi-partner initiative with the support of the Arab Countries Water Utility Association and a multitude of water and sanitation service providers to study further the 5 pernicious problems that service providers are facing when operating in protracted crisis. So those problems are poor water resource management, ensuring continuity in access to safe water supply, inability to evacuate and treat wastewater, unreliable supply of energy, and severe decrease in cash flow. This eventually led to the publication in 2021 of a report called Joining Forces to Combat Protracted Crisis, Humanitarian and Development Support for Water and Sanitation Providers in the Middle East and North Africa. This report contains a number of case studies and recommendations for the service providers, humanitarian and development actors, the 4 proactive ways to strengthen humanitarian development partnerships, and I would even say beyond with other actors, such as academia and private sector, to anticipate and respond to protracted crises without compromising the humanitarian mission are. First, humanitarian and development actors should work together with service providers to make emergency preparedness plans for acute crisis as a no-regrets investment. Second, pre-crisis partnerships would enable humanitarian actors to establish links with service providers and their supporting ministries. Third, in a protracted crisis, it should be a standard requirement for humanitarian and development actors to coordinate and align their interventions to support the resilience building of service providers. And fourth, both pre-crisis and during protracted crisis, humanitarian and development actors should work in a complementary and coordinated manner with service providers to unmask underlying vulnerabilities. Now, to focus on the topic of water resources management, which is one of the 5 pernicious problems, one of the key recommendations is to build a shared body of knowledge in good times and bad, as we observe an inadequate governed management of the water resources in those settings. More specifically, all actors should publish the water resources data they generate to enable better decision-making in water resources management in protracted crisis. Development actors have an important role to play in helping service providers prepare for crisis during periods of relative stability. Humanitarian actors should both draw on and add to the best available water resources data to inform decision-making on water resources exploitation. To take an example, in Jordan, at the beginning of the Syrian crisis, the influx of refugees in host communities created an increased pressure on the water supply systems in communities which were already suffering from an inadequate service. The first reaction of humanitarian actors in such situation is to increase the supply, and the most logical response is to start drilling new wells. If that would have been done, it could have increased significantly the overexploitation of the groundwater resources and put at threat the sustainability of this resource that is very scarce in that country, as all know. For the ICRC, we relied on the information available about the water resources to decide to invest on structural interventions on the demand side in order not to increase the abstraction of water while improving the service delivery to the host communities and refugees. Unfortunately, this type of information is not always available in all the countries where humanitarians operate. Now, I also encourage you to read other case studies in the report related to the predictable deterioration of Gaza's aquifer and the overcoming of the shutdown of Aleppo's main water supply. The urgency to act is especially evident today as access to safe water and sanitation plays also a crucial role as a barrier to the spread of new threats like COVID. To finish this presentation, I would like to introduce a few reports published by SCRC that may be of interest to those who are interested to dig further into those questions. The urban services during protracted armed conflict I mentioned before, the joining forces to combat protracted crisis I also mentioned before, the report When Rains Turns to Dust, which explores how people experience conflict and climate risks in combination and how they cope and adapt. It discusses what the ICRC and the humanitarian sector as a whole must do to address these risks and is a call for strengthening climate action and finance in conflict-affected countries. Finally, the most recent, published last week, called Explosive Weapons with Wide Area Effects, a deadly choice in populated areas, which calls for a change of mindset and provides a range of recommendations to prevent or mitigate the impact of explosive weapons with wide area effects and better protect the civilian population. And with that, I give back the floor to Gül.
Thank you, Guillaume. It's really striking to also see the outputs that are created, not only from the action itself, but also doing the research, addressing the issue of data availability and sharing. It's very nice insights from the practice. And we continue with Salman Khairallah as our second contributor speaker for this session from the Praxis. Salman has a bachelor's degree in environmental science from the University of Kufa in Najaf in Iraq. And since 2006, he has been working in the field of environmental and water protection. His work focuses on conflicts over water in the Tigris and Euphrates River Basin. He's the co-founder and director of Humat Dijla, the Tigris River Protection Association, and also active in Save the Tigris, an international advocacy campaign aiming to protect the heritage and water resources from the impacts of unsustainable management and climate change. Salman, the floor is yours.
Thanks, thank you, Gul. And it's almost good afternoon for the people in my region, and good morning for the people in your region. And also, I think we have people from the region that good evening, that they have good evening already. So I don't want to talk, today actually I will talk about the challenge. I will talk in the beginning in generally for Mesopotamia, and later I will talk about Iraq especially. So for Mesopotamia, in the beginning, before I talk about the challenge and everything that we are faced here in our area, I want to just share with you this piece of verse from Quran Kareem, and I trust that all the religious and all the truth around all the world that they have everything, talk about water and talk about how to share water. And here in this Quran Kareem, in the Qamar verse, they said, وَنَبِّئْهُمْ أَنَّ الْمَاءَ قَسْمَةٌ بَيْنَهُمْ كُلَّ شُرْبٌ مُحْتَضَرٌ. So and that's mean and inform them that the water is to be shared between her and them. Each one's right to drink being established by terms. So this kind regarding this verse, I just want to say that in all the generation, in all the religions, in all the communities, all of them talk about how to share water and how to protect the environment in many ways. So if I want to talk about the Mesopotamia, and in Mesopotamia and generally all the civilization here in Mesopotamia, it's built near or close or on the rivers. And the main two rivers in Mesopotamia is Tigris River and Euphrates River. And it has been feeded all this area from thousands years ago, like from Sumerian time, 7,000 or 9,000 years ago till now. All of those countries is feeding by these two rivers, and we have the rain and snow and the rest of the things. I just want to mention in the beginning, how is the situation here in this area right now? The situation is really difficult in Mesopotamia and generally because of the challenge of the climate change, and in the same time, the challenge of all the dams that they are built already from all those countries around Iraq and inside Iraq also. So the first challenge in this area or in this region is talk about how is the relationship between all those 4 countries, or if we will account Kurdistan as a country, it will be 5 countries in this region: Turkey, Syria, Iran, and Iraq, and Kurdistan region between all those areas. So in this area, till now, there is no any agreement. Unfortunately, there is no agreement even before during Saddam time, during Saddam regime, and now there is no any agreement about how to share water between those countries. It's just a small piece of paper. They talk about it, and there is no. They didn't go in deep of information and talk about how in the future what they should do if there is shortage of water and all this kind of things. And now all of them, they have all those dams, and there is no water to fill all this billions of cubic meter that they want to fill it. And and this is the first of challenge, is the negotiation between the Iraq and Iran. And unfortunately, there is no any accepting from the Iranian side to start any negotiation about water. From the Turkish side, in last few days, we got an information from the Ministry of Water Resources. They said they will start a new negotiation from the February. So inshallah, everything will be good, and they will start again to at least to have a paper to share the water in a right way between the 2 countries. Here in Iraq, we didn't say those 2 rivers is just for Iraq. No, those 2 rivers is for all countries in this area, in Mesopotamia generally. Now, if we want to talk about all this green point that you see, it's dams, and all those dams is affecting the 2 rivers actually, and the tributaries for those 2 rivers. It came from Iraq, more than 40 tributaries from the Iranian side, and the rest also coming from Turkish side, and all of them now is cutting by the Iranian regime and Turkish regime, and which is something ridiculous, and start the conflict here inside Iraq. And we are in the middle of shortage of water right now here in Iraq. But in the end, the last week, at least we got some rain. So we filled some of our dams with some water to just rehabilitate our area again. But unfortunately, a lot of our farmers and agricultural land that we lost it, and we cannot bring it back again. There is a lot of impact for the dams, and I don't want to talk a lot of the impact. I just want to talk about the downstream impact, like reducing the biodiversity, poor water quality, low, all this kind of things. And the dam also, the dam is blocked all the fish migration, and also there is a warring in this way. It's make the water not fresh water. You cannot call it fresh water. Has a lot of scientific research. It's published and you can find it on Google. Inside, if we want to talk about inside Iraq, there is a lot of a problem that we are faced with the management also, not only with our neighbor country, because even inside Iraq, we don't have any negotiation between the city. That's mean the cities that in north part of Iraq, they have water more than the cities in the south part of Iraq. And there is no sharing in a right way between all those cities. In the same time, the government, they cannot move all the I will talk later about all the use over that we have it and how much use over that we have it here inside Iraq. And because of all the dams and pollution that we have it, and actually the topic of the pollution that we have it is this in front of you. We have industrial source, we have a cultural source, we have remand, so forth, we have petroleum exploration, and we have sewage waste, and we have waste dumped in the river. All this going directly to the river. So all this, it's bring to us in 2018 more than 6,000 population in Basra. They got poisoned because of the water, and they got cholera and the rest of the poisoned also from those bacteria. Here, if we want to talk about Baghdad, here all these blue points that the sewage treatment station or station of the sewage treatment, and you can see that all those treatment station, actually they didn't work that much professionally. It's work like 25% or 30% even from the what should work, and even it's very old, all the stations. And you can see this is just just to show you how is it the water will be if it's going from north to the south. And in the north it will be in up of the picture, and down of the picture it will be the south. So you will see how the water it will be changing in this area. All this number in front of you, I just want to give you an example for all those stations. Sorry for all this data, it's in Arabic and I didn't translate it. Here in the blue, it's just writing the name of all the treatment station. And the first number, it's talk about the small numbers, is talk about how much those stations take out to the cubic meter per day, take out to the river directly, or with the perfect working, with the perfect treatment. Like if we want to talk about a Senegal Bridge, the sixth one, a Senegal Bridge station treatment, it should take out to the river 1,000 treated. 1,000 cubic meter per day treated, but actually this number is for 2015. Actually, in 2015, it's take out to the river around 56,343 cubic meter per day. So more than 56 times like what should its work. So this is a lot of a problem that we are faced from the sewage water and all the pollution. All the use over here that we have it in Iraq, the excesses on the water, about 22,000 case on Euphrates and Tigris rivers. This is in 2018. And actually in last 2 years, we have a lot of contamination in our rivers. Sorry, I will just took another 1 minute, Google, and I will finish. All this picture that you see in front of you, this is in 2018. We lost a lot of fish in our rivers because of contamination. And this contamination, it's become to be bioaccumulation in all those fish that we lost it in our rivers. And this is in 2018, and it's happened again in 2019, and it's happened again, but less in 2020 also. So I just want to say, if you want more information, just make sure to follow our platforms. This is our website, humaddijla.org. And on Meta, you can find us with this user at humaddijla. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Salman. It's also nice now to hear a sort of zooming approach to a certain country with its own local challenges and the work of a local national NGO that works towards addressing these issues, addressing the problems, and also creating an environmental movement among the new generation. Thank you so much again. And now we will switch to the fourth speaker, Alexandra. I see that already question and answers are being provided in the chat, so I will leave the more interactive discussion to the end. So for Alexandra, Alexandra Kaplan holds a master's degree in international relations of the Middle East. Currently, she's a PhD candidate in geography at Oregon State University in the US. Her research interests focus on the multiscalar interaction of power and politics in transboundary river basins. She's also the manager of the Transboundary Freshwater Dispute Database, which houses the world's largest collection of documents relating to the management and governance of shared water resources. Alexandra, the floor is yours.
Sorry about that. I was having mouse problems. Thank you, Gul, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. It's so great to have such a large turnout, and I'm really looking forward to having a really fruitful discussion with everyone later. So today I'm going to be talking about transboundary water conflict and cooperation. So I'm sort of providing a more zoomed out look than my colleagues who have been focusing more on case studies or more localized forms of conflict and cooperation in Middle Eastern river basins. So first, just to provide some context about transboundary water cooperation and why it's so important to talk about. The map on this slide shows the world's transboundary river basins. These are rivers that are shared by 2 or more countries. About half of Earth's population and half of Earth's land surface fall within the shaded areas on these maps. Given that there's such a large number of transboundary basins, it's inevitable that these rivers are going to be shared by countries that don't necessarily have warm political relations. Coupled with challenges like rising demand, growing scarcity, and climate change, and given water's status as a vital resource, it's absolutely crucial that it would seem that water would act as a motivation for conflict between states, so looking at the interstate level. However, history has shown us that in the past 3,000 years or so, water has actually not acted as the casus belli for war at the interstate level. Quite the contrary, navigating the multifaceted challenges posed by managing transboundary water resources requires that states negotiate and cooperate in order to reap the mutual benefits water has to offer them. Proponents of environmental peacebuilding theory suggest that cooperation over shared natural resources can help transform the nature of interactions between 2 parties in conflict by increasing dialogue and decreasing feelings of mutual distrust. As a vital resource, transboundary water networks can create shared dependencies that provide an impetus for cooperation that extends beyond political borders and ethnic divides. Traditionally, the research on water conflict and cooperation has emphasized interactions that take place at the interstate level. However, this focus contrasts with what's happening on the ground, where these interactions often take place in more localized context, as my colleagues have pointed out in their presentations. It's also hindered an understanding of how institutions and actors who operate at different spatial scales interact to influence transboundary water management processes. These processes are part of a broader waterscape in which power dynamics and social relations between different water users shape and are shaped by water's material flows and its constructed meanings. NGOs, private sector entities, farmers, civil society organizations, and local and municipal governments are just some of the many actors with an interest in the management of transboundary water resources. An examination of the multi-level nature of hydropolitics in the Euphrates, Tigris, and Jordan basins, which I'm going to be talking to you about today, will provide us with an opportunity to understand how the management of these shared water resources are influenced by actors who operate within, between, and across different spatial scales and different scales of management and governance. For example, Turkish hydraulic development in the Euphrates Tigris basin is challenged domestically and abroad, as Salman was talking about, while non-state actors in the Jordan River basin frequently engage in subnational water cooperation, especially in Israel and Palestine. Because transboundary water interactions can be strategic acts designed to further the interest of one party, it's useful to consider how power can influence these interactions. Power is indeed a primary determinant of water management structures. And unequal distributions of power can influence not only the outcome of cooperative interactions over water, but the nature of these interactions themselves. So to help understand the inherently political question of who gets how much water and why, my research draws on the framework of hydrohegemony as sort of its overarching theoretical framework. Now, historically, this framework has been applied at the interstate level to understand how power dynamics as they occur between states, so between state governments, influence transboundary water management. In my own research, I'm seeking to apply this framework at the subnational and the transnational scales to account for the different actors operating and managing shared water resources at those spatial scales. So as you can see on this figure here, hydrohegemony is premised on two main things, geography and power. In my research and in this presentation today, I'm going to focus mostly on the power aspect of it. Essentially, the framework suggests that hydrohegemony, which can be viewed as sort of akin to leadership in a river basin, is the result of different forms of power, mainly material power, bargaining power, and ideational power. Now, when people hear the word power, they often think of things like guns, tanks, and money. And indeed, these usually come to mind because they're visible forms of power, they're tangible, and they're what people normally think of countries using, for example, when they want to achieve something or accomplish a goal. However, in practice, countries and indeed non-state actors prefer to use more subtle forms of power, including bargaining power and ideational power. So consideration of these less visible forms of power is important. Bargaining power refers to how actors set the rules of the game, whereas ideational power refers to setting the discourse itself. Now, ideational power is typically viewed as like the most potent form of power, I guess you could say, because it refers to how states or non-state actors are able to frame the discourse about water through processes of securitization and knowledge construction. It's essentially the ability to get other actors to want what you want. So this brings me to my research questions and goals of my research. So essentially, the goal of my research is to answer the overarching question of how power dynamics are manifested within transboundary water governance across different spatial scales. And I'm really looking at how power and international relations will influence water management at different scales, and how power can influence patterns of conflict and cooperation between actors operating at these different scales, and using information from those two questions, looking at how transboundary water arrangements in the Jordan and Tigris-Euphrates basins can be transformed into more equitable arrangements. So just a very brief overview as to why I chose my field sites. So in the Jordan Basin, I'm looking specifically at interactions taking place between three riparians, Israel, Jordan, and Palestine. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in this basin in terms of water management. It's one of the most water-stressed basins in the world. It's a site of a long-standing political conflict, and we have joint water management initiatives going on at both the level of the state and at the sub-state level, mostly promoted by regional NGOs such as EcoPeace. My second field site, the Euphrates Tigris Basin, In this basin, I'm looking mostly at interactions occurring between Turkey, Iraq, and Syria as the main riparians. Again, there's lots of interesting stuff happening in the water world at different spatial scales. Looking at the interstate level, this river basin water governance is highly institutionalized. There's about a dozen or so international treaties or agreements. Again, these countries generally don't have warm political relations. There's a high degree of hydro development going on, especially in Turkey, which is the upstream country. And as Salman was saying, the downstream ramifications of dam development can be quite harmful. And most states manage their waters unilaterally, with limited cooperation occurring mostly over technical issues. So in these next two slides, I'm just going to briefly talk about how hydropolitical interactions take place between actors at different spatial scales. So the figure on the left shows how these scales are nested within one another. You can think of interactions occurring at the global level as setting the stage in which all hydropolitical interactions will take place. At the transnational scale, we have actors who work across international borders. So for example, multinational NGOs, humanitarian aid agencies, etc. The interstate level is composed mostly of governmental ministries and officials. And then when you zoom in at the subnational level, the floor really opens up and you get a whole bunch of different people and organizations working together. You have NGOs, again, epistemic communities, so basically communities of knowledge, local governments, and in the case of the Euphrates-Tigris Basin, you also have a lot of anti-dam activists working at the domestic level as well. Now, this is by no means an exhaustive list of actors. It's just a few of the many working within water management in the Jordan River Basin. As I previously mentioned, all actors involved in water management and governance have certain resources available to them. They utilize certain power strategies, power tactics to achieve their water-related interests. In the Jordan Basin, actors have utilized all three different types of power to achieve their goals. For example, in the 60s, Israel conducted airstrikes on the Arab League's headwater diversion project in Syria to prevent the headwaters of the Jordan from being diverted. The Jordan River is a very important surface water resource in Israel. And also sub-state actors, non-state actors utilize power as well in the Jordan River Basin. And what I find interesting about this is that we see a lot of non-state actors using ideational power, which, like I said, is typically like viewed as the most potent form of power. EcoPeace is a transnational NGO in the region, and their Good Water Neighbors project essentially puts Israeli and Palestinian and Jordanian villagers working together to cooperate over their shared water resources. And in doing so, they create a new dialogue and reframe the issue of water management and cooperation between these parties that might not, come together and have this dialogue if EcoPeace was not there, if they weren't participating in this program. In the Euphrates-Tigris Basin, we have a lot of interesting interactions going on too at different levels. At the global level, the privatization of the Turkish water sector in the 90s opened the door to a lot of foreign investors, especially a lot of European credit agencies, investment firms coming in to finance various hydraulic development projects. Again, at the transnational level, we have anti-dam activists. So these would be NGOs, mostly operating across international borders. ISIS is also a really important transnational actor in this river basin. With the proliferation of ISIS across Syria and Iraq, we saw a non-state actor take on the responsibilities of a sort of pseudo-state by providing water services and other public utilities to people living in the areas that they captured. And ISIS also frequently utilized water as a weapon. They shut off water supply to key areas, threatened to destroy key water infrastructure. And when they captured the Mosul Dam in 2014, they even had the potential to flood Baghdad, which is just downstream of the Mosul Dam. Again, cooperation at the interstate level in this basin occurs mostly at the technical level. The main three riparians have a technical agency through which they cooperate. And at the subnational level, we have a lot of anti-dam activism going on. For example, a lot of artists, celebrities, environmentalists, and lawyers come together, as Salman was talking about in his presentation, to protest dam building on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And these anti-dam activists have really been able to utilize bargaining power and ideational power to their advantage, to mostly with the result of delaying dam construction. So most recently, construction of the Elisu Dam on the Tigris River has proved to be a flashpoint in the basin. And by framing the Elisu Dam as an environmental and human rights crisis, opponents of the dam challenged the sanction, peace, and development discourse put forward by Turkey. And this had the effect of increasing international scrutiny on the project, and it added an element of urgency to activist protests. While anti-dam activists did succeed in politicizing the dam through several counter-securitization moves, they did end up delaying construction of the dam, but the dam was eventually built. But however, their actions and their protests have continued to cast sort of a shadow and a legacy over dam construction in general in the ET basin.
Alexandra, I think you are wrapping up. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I'm on my last slide, sorry. So just to wrap up, I'd just like to mention a few areas of where I think my research could lead to opportunities for collaboration, keeping in theme with the panel. So again, the goal in my research is to help develop a clearer understanding of how power is embedded and contested within transboundary water management at different scales. And with this nuanced knowledge, I'm hoping that it can help policymakers deliver essentially better water management solutions. And these results can also help water managers, development workers, and local communities identify more effective ways of challenging the status quo and enacting lasting change that will be beneficial to them. And Gul, the floor is back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you so much. So we are, I think, perfectly on time to introduce our panel discussion by the four speakers and also interaction from the audience. I just wanted to make sure in the chat, I think, as far as I can see, all the questions are already answered by our speakers. If you have more questions, please feel free to throw them. So we will have the discussion after the panel session. Now for the four speakers, we have questions that they have been already maybe to a certain extent addressing in their presentation, how they collaborate with other sectors, other stakeholder groups outside their own organization. And where do you see room for improvement in their own sector to facilitate better collaboration, and also for other sectors to create better opportunities? So I now give the floor to our four speakers in the same order that they spoke to give us maybe 3-4 minute maximum reflection on this collaboration, exploration of collaboration opportunities with other sectors, other stakeholder groups. Julian, shall I start with you?
Sure. I will just quickly have to get my brain back into this after Peter asked a very, very interesting question on the chat.
Yes, maybe you can also reflect on that before your own
I think I will leave it with everybody to read the tiny novel I wrote in the chat if you're interested in that. Hope that I somewhat answered your question, Peter. As I said, it's complicated and it's very interesting. And there's a lot to it. But with regards to collaboration and experiences, I think it came already through a little bit from my presentation. But for me, the main experience or insight that I've won is that, plainly put, my research would be impossible without the collaboration with other organizations, like with civil society organizations, with humanitarian organizations. And part of that is just getting physical access for field work. When I did field work in the Gaza Strip, I wouldn't have been able to get in without a humanitarian organization saying, hey, this is somebody who works with us. And at the same time now with COVID hitting, I would have been equally unable to properly do virtual interviews via Zoom without sort of on-the-ground support that Humat Isra actually provided. Because it's really hard to get people sort of reliably online to talk about different issues. And so having boots on the ground basically is so important for data collection. And then at the same time, this data is already available in many ways, collected by practitioners. And so, of course, there are reports, but there are also a lot of different organizations that just share a lot of their work. Like, for example, the ICRC has a resource center that you can access online, where they have a lot of their reports. REACH as an organization, or a sort of movement of humanitarian organizations, has a resource center where they publish reports, where they publish just data sets of surveys that they do. So this, I think, goes back a bit to what Guillaume was also talking about with regards to data sharing as such an important part of collaboration that we should all use, and I think can also just be a bit more active, both from the research and the practitioner side, to just make our own data available for others, because it's a hard field to work in, and we don't have to do the work twice.
Thank you, Julian. Guillaume, can I give the floor to you for your reflections about collaboration, existing collaboration and collaboration opportunities?
Thank you, Gil, and thank you, Julian, for this first speech. So maybe to start from my perspective, this collaboration is increasingly needed from our perspective because of the evolution of the situation on the ground in the countries where we work, and mostly because of the protracted nature of the conflict we have to deal with, but also the increased urbanization, which makes it even more increasingly complex to deal with. And so the fact that eventually there is more that needs to be done in order to answer the humanitarian needs of the population, more in terms of quantity, more humanitarian action needs to be done, but also more in terms of new and different approaches. Maybe to take an image how it works for ICRC, it moved from an infrastructure approach. We were mostly dealing with infrastructure, rehabilitating, repairing, constructing infrastructure, to more a system or service approach, trying to enable, to make sure that people would have access to those essential services. So we've seen that, of course, this wasn't something we could do on our own, because of the sheer scale of those needs, and so that we needed to work differently. So just to imagine that we would grow bigger and be able to do everything on our own wasn't possible. So we needed to learn to collaborate with others, and that mostly for evidence gathering in order to influence, and that's typically the work that has been done with the 2015 Urban Services Report, which I mentioned, where we collaborated with Mark Zaytoun, the professor of the University of East Anglia, and where that eventually has been a leading report in the past years in the field, in the humanitarian field, and also leading the humanitarian development nexus evolution, which is great to see that eventually, it was the right work to do this research, this study, to make sure that then we could influence. It's also increasingly important for us to learn to collaborate also just for our own operations, to make sure that we are able to do more and better in the places where we work. There I can take the example of Gaza. In Gaza, where a couple of years back we started to look at the integrated resilience of the essential services there, and we collaborated with academia from Canada, Alec High from the University of Toronto, and then more recently with the Swiss Tropical Public Health Institute on conducting now an health impact assessment of these integrated essential services that will help us to do more focused, better humanitarian interventions that will have an impact on the public health of the people there. So I think it's really about that. And so what has to change, what needs to be done better, I think, from the Others, I think it's of course to be less risk adverse, and I think Julian, you said it, that we are working in conflict environment. It's sometimes a bit frightening for people, but indeed we are often ready to accompany them in that endeavor. And also it's important on our side to continue changing the mindset that we have. We are still an organization that is like to do things on our own, and to control everything. When you work with others, yes, of course you have to give up a bit on that, and that's typically on the data sharing. Data sharing is essential for that endeavor, and we need to learn to do more of this sharing. And that's typically also for ICRC very important, because we are a very secretive organization. We like to say that all the data we deal with are confidential, but no, it's not the case, and we need to be more open in order to make progresses together.
Thanks a lot, yeah. Salman, can we also hear your reflection on collaboration that is already taking place, and where do you see opportunities for further collaboration? And what would you expect from other organizations, other stakeholders?
Thank you, Gul. Yeah, and in the beginning, I just want to say the collaboration here in Iraq is very difficult to talk about environment, especially. Because here in Iraq, if you want to talk about another topic, maybe it's easier to find any collaboration, even with the government sector, with the public sector, or even with the local sector, with all of them, even with the international sector. But when you want to talk about environment, especially with the government, you need to deal with the more than three ministry. And even the local authority, they have a lot of access and they have a lot of control to deal with them for all those collaboration. But we are dealing actually with this, because we always mention this for the government sector, that we are not only showing the bad point that done by the government. We want to put our hand with your hand to fix it. This is what we want. We are putting the point on the old challenge, and we can fix it together. We have a lot of information. We have international support for the more information, for more resources to do something better than what we have. But unfortunately, here in Iraq, even when to be environmental activists is a little bit difficult to work alone without a group or something like this. Otherwise, there is a lot of threatening that you will get, and a lot of threatening from the militias and the others sector that we have it here in Iraq, because there is a lot of, like, if we want to talk about the pollution on oil, the oil field pollution, no one can talk about this. You will be danger. It's very risky to talk about this kind of things. But for the also, if I want to talk about internally here inside Iraq, we as a Hamad Dijla, we didn't mention our name as an NGO only. No, we are a movement. We are a social movement here, environmental social movement. So we have a lot of collaboration. We did it with all the local and personal activists, individual activists, and also groups of activists that it's came now. And also with them, also there is a lot of academics that we have a lot of collaboration with them. In the same time, internationally, we have a good support from the Safe Tigris Association, which is all in Netherlands. So also we have a lot of supporting, and this is what we showed during all the collaboration that we did during the Mesopotamian Water Forum that Julian was attending this in 2019. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Salman. Yeah, so from international to local, again, we heard from Salman about the challenges of being an environmental social movement and still getting the opportunity to collaborate with the government, with the public sector. I guess it's not unique to Iraq, but it's very typical on the contrary. Alexandra, I already saw in the chat you were talking about restrictions due to COVID. Maybe you could also refer to that. What does it mean for collaboration? How do you experience it in terms of your work? And that heavily relies on data also created by governments and by other organizations.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think it's a really important question to have constructive dialogue on. And I'd like to reiterate what Julianne was saying in her response, just approaching, you know, these topics of water conflict and cooperation from a research perspective, from an academic perspective. Access and data availability are two of the biggest challenges, especially when you're looking at water in the Middle East. Just coming to the Middle East as an American, as an outside person, I've found that getting access to key informants, people I want to interview, especially since, you know, I really want to do in-person interviews, like I was saying in the chat, because a lot of the populations I'm hoping to be able to talk with might not have reliable internet access, things like that. Getting access to people in person has been a challenge, and COVID has not helped that challenge. COVID sort of became more of a thing when I was planning on doing field work this past year. So I'm hoping to be able to complete most of my field work this coming summer. I've done, you know, more like informal conversations so far, and most of my like information from my presentations come from those conversations, and also like document reviews and things like that. With regards to data availability and access to data, that's also challenging. In this region, you know, countries don't like to be transparent about data sharing, right? They want to keep their water secrets to themselves, you know, whether that's so they can keep whatever advantage they have, or if it's just because that data is not there, they just don't have it for whatever reason, it's just not available. And I think that's where collaborating with other sectors, with people working on the ground, comes into play to address both these challenges, both in terms of accessing people and accessing data. Like Julianne said, having boots on the ground to get those hard to reach areas like Gaza or, you know, certain villages in the West Bank will be really, really helpful. And just having those networks of contacts will be absolutely crucial to expanding research from an academic perspective. And also in my work, like I said in my presentation, I'm really hoping to make this exploration of power and politics a more multi-scalar, a multifaceted, sort of expand the scope of the research that's been done on this topic. Right now, there's a really big literature on it, but a lot of it's mostly been done like at the interstate level. And I think it's super important to, you know, include these actors that are operating at different scales, because they do. Like our colleagues have been saying on this panel, water management happens very locally, you know, at the level of the village or the farm or the community. And so looking at what's actually happening at those scales is really, really important for informing better water management decisions at the interstate level, which is where things, you know, get done, so to speak. So that's where I think, you know, those are future directions for collaboration.
Thanks, Alexandra. Thank you. Both the reflection that we heard from each speaker, from each panelist, and also the comments that I've been seeing, the questions and comments from the other participants of the session. Would anyone like to give last few maybe words about what is expected from their own organization, type of organization, whether academia, whether local NGO, whether international NGO? How could you respond to those? How could you also maybe change the way things are done? Or how would you like to get support from the general environment of humanitarian and development sector, and from water management also as a sector? Any last words from?
I would have a couple of thoughts, especially with regards to academia, because I think the issue that we have is that academia in and of itself is kind of resistant to collaborating with non-academics. And part of that is that we are just historically bad at talking about why our research matters outside of academia, to a degree that you know, it's just not valued as a part of your job as an academic. Like the way academia works right now is you publish your theoretical papers or your conceptual papers, and you move on to the next paper, next research project, next grant. But we don't really spend enough time on trying to figure out how our research can be useful and how we can make these connections. I think one of the very positive examples on the contrary, for example, is what Guillaume mentioned about the collaboration that ICRC has had with Mark Zaytoun for quite some years already, where a lot has happened on how you can make the academic research and the conceptual work useful in a sense that is beyond writing a paper and putting it out there. And I think that is just something that needs kind of a rethinking of how academia works in general, because it's not just on specifically conflict affected countries or anything, but it's just, as I said, something where we somehow don't really consider collaboration outside of academia as a valuable use of our time. And I think it should be one of the, if not the most important thing that we do.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. We talk about these concepts of knowledge co-production, knowledge co-creation, and that definitely heavily relies on the local communities, local organizations, as well as national, international NGOs that heavily work. Like Guillaume said, of course, you want to execute, implement your actions. That's maybe your mandate, but you also want to be able to source a creator of reliable data that can be shared. Also collaborating with academics that are also invested, that are interested in this important challenge. Any closing remarks? Because before I ask also to our audience if they would like to reflect on these collaboration challenges and opportunities. Guillaume, Salman.
Yeah. I can say a few words.
First,
First, I think it's what Julian showed is that there is more and more research on that topic, and that's very important. That means that it has been acknowledged as a priority for the academic world to invest in that field, because it's indeed needed, so that we can find better solutions for the future, so that people in those contexts will suffer less in the future. Because I think what Salman showed is it's really of concern. There are a lot of people who are suffering around the world, so that's a very important point. What maybe just the last learning that we should try to do better in the future is about speed. I think we work at different speed, and that's something we really have to acknowledge. We humanitarians are very impatient. We want everything to be done for tomorrow, if not for today or even for yesterday. We need to learn that that's not like that it works in the research field. You need to be patient. You need to and that's where I think also the example of the partnership that we have had with Mark Zaytoun on developing over the years. It's important to keep that over the years, not just one paper after each other. So very important point. So thank you very much.
Yeah, excellent. I think we are hearing such important sort of keywords that are principles, maybe building the trust, also at the same time keeping your independence, but still delivering fast enough. So it's quite a trade-off between these three, I think. But maybe it also has to do with this humanitarian development nexus that you were talking about, Guillaume, that they necessarily don't work at the same speed. And adding on that, the speed of research and theorizing, conceptualizing how this works across the world makes it even a bigger challenge temporarily. Any comments from the audience? I see. Yeah, Salman, you are the speaker. You have to speak up. Go ahead.
Sorry. In a few words, I totally agree with Julian and Guillaume about what they said. And also there is another very important point for us as a locals here, as a local NGO and local communities, the solidarity on the national level and on the international level is very important to find a lot of solidarity. And now there is a lot of ways to show your solidarity with the others, at least on a social media, to show your solidarity on a social media, to support their website, to show their research, make their research show for the more people and send their message for the other people. And this is very important for us also. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Salman. Yeah, from my experience, about 10 years ago, I witnessed the different NGOs from Iraq, Syria, and Turkey coming together for Ulusu Dam they had this campaign, Save Hasan Cave. And there were participants from Basra, from marshes, because they are affected by these dams as well. And they don't care about the conflict or dispute between the governments, but they had this. Unfortunately, it didn't end successfully if we look at what's happening in Hasan Cave, but yeah, it was quite impressive. So I'm now turning to the audience. Would anyone like to speak? Now take the floor, ask questions to the panelists, also add to our discussion on how to improve the collaboration between especially research and practice, but also generally thinking about governmental organizations. We hardly talk about companies, the role of private sector in the region or beyond. If there are any contributions on that, we would be happy to hear. I see one hand, so that would be Helga. Yeah. You should be able to speak, I think.
Yes, now I can. Sorry, I
Go
didn't
ahead.
put my video on so fast. Thank you for all these contributions. I've been dealing with a lot around that, and in particular for the Jordan Valley. My question is, if you see in all the negotiations that water is becoming a commodity rather than a human right, when it comes to official communication between the governments, are they talking about exchange of water, exchange of solar energy, but not talking about giving back resources to the people on the ground in the local communities? How do you see that? Thank you.
Thank you, Helga, for this very important question. Would any of the speakers like to take this up? Maybe with examples from your own experience, maybe findings from the research? Water becoming a commodity rather than a human right. Or maybe you don't agree with that. Maybe you have a different observation or impression. I see a hand from the audience, but I don't know if it's a reaction to this or a new question. So anyone? Julian, Guillaume, Salman, Alexandra?
I can try it.
Go ahead, Guillaume.
I think, yeah, of course, the question about water being a human right, I think is questioned probably in a lot of different places. I think it's. I wouldn't say that it's becoming a commodity. I think in times of armed conflict, unfortunately, water is another victim of the conflict, and so it's often misused, mismanaged, targeted, and so eventually it's the service to the people who is suffering, and eventually the people. So I think it's. Yes, there is a commercialization of water, but I wouldn't see it as the main issue, at least in places affected by conflict. Voilà.
Thank you, Guillaume. I see also two other participants. Rafiqul Islam. With your question?
Yes. No,
Yeah, go
it's
ahead.
not my question. It's I'm just sharing my experience. I'm from Bangladesh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it is my observation that in my country, I totally agree with the Helga that water is becoming commodity. In my country, if I observe in 20 years ago, nobody would buy a bottle of water. But now it's totally different. And the government is also focusing the same way. The government, like the government doesn't take the responsibility to provide to supply the water to the people. And the government organization encourages the local community to buy water from them, not to supply as a government, as a state.
Mhm.
For example, the people can buy one truck, like some liter of water as a supply, private company. And if they don't pay them, like one truck for 500 taka, it's like €5. If they don't pay, then they will not supply it. In my capital city of my country, in the summer season, if some people do not like get the supply like a truck, they will suffer from the water. And it is becoming more and more.
Yep.
And in my city, like DESA, like Dhaka Water Supply Authority, they don't take the responsibility to supply as a like a pipe water. So that they are encouraging to buy the truck as a supply of water, not the pipe water.
Yeah. Thank you, Rafik. I think it's we observe it also in the Middle East in several cases that water becomes more and more expensive. Although it is available through the trucks, through bottled water, it becomes more and more expensive. Maybe that's what Guillaume was also referring, in a way that it becomes a victim, but then it makes also the communities a victim. That, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. I see also another hand, Yves Marcellus. I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. Please go ahead with a very brief intervention. We have 2 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I will be brief. Thanks to all the participants. I hope you can hear me. My question is for Guillaume. First of all, like you talk about, like taking the example of Syria. So I wonder, is there, like in the international level, is there, let's say, like an understanding of let's say for people, like during conflict, for people not attacking water supply network, like for instance, it is clear that during conflict people should not like destroy health structure, for instance. Is there like like some kind of like agreement like that for water infrastructure? And the second part of my question is also look at during like mass displacement of people, how can we have, is there like like a management model for like a sustainable management model for like water supply, like looking at like cooperation, coordination for the long term, look at like the costs, like personal, spare parts, something that like look at for the long term. As like you take the example, people live in those settlements for like very, very long time, like sometimes 15 years or longer. Is there like, I don't know, like some research that have been done around that and show, like a good example of like a management model that will work for the long term? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Reflection. 1 minute reflection, Guillaume.
Yes, I will try.
It's a very big topic, I'm aware.
But it's on the first question, on the question of basically of the law. Of course, there is a legal framework. There is international humanitarian law that is protecting civilian objects and civilian population. And so it exists. Then if it is followed, that's another story. And that's what we see, that indeed in conflict situation, the rules are not always followed. And that's what is unfortunate. I think it's important that it's acknowledged at a higher level, at international level. And that has been shown last year by the adoption of a resolution at the UN Security Council on the protection of civilian objects and personnel for essential services. So this is really a positive step, but of course we hope it will have more impact in the future. On the second question on displacement, that's a very good question too. I wouldn't say that there is a good management model. So what we see is that often there are a lot of bad management models, and for me one of the main principles is to suggest that displacement will be for a short period of times. We see that it's almost applied everything by government saying, oh, these people have been displaced, but don't worry, they will be back in 2 weeks. No, we see that they are displaced for a very long time, being either displacement or refugees, both internal displaced and refugees. And so for me, the best lesson I would say is from the early days trying to find sustainable solution, not just temporary short-term solutions which are not dignified for the people.
I'm sorry, I had to mute because my neighbor started renovation again. With this, we will end the session, and thank you all for your contributions, to our speakers, panelists, to all the participants of the session, to our support team, Buket and Joe. Of course, the conference is continuing. Here I copied to chat our session for the sessions in the afternoon, our session. Please feel free to register and join, and hope to continue this dialogue in the future. And please feel free also to get in touch with our speakers if you would like to follow up the discussion. Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you also for your very active
everyone.
participation in the chat.
It was wonderful. I still see comments coming in.